Loading up the ship. We'll be back.
Fine. But at least bring me back an ice cone. No, make it two.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in The Bad Batch Season 3, Episodes 10 and 11. Now, if you've only seen Episode 10, don't worry, we're going to stay spoiler-free for Episode 11 until we get to that point in this video. I will say, though, that these two episodes have some deep-cut Easter eggs to the rest of Star Wars, going back to the Clone Wars, and even up through The Rise of Skywalker. In honor of The Bad Batch's final season, I want to show you something. This is one of my favorite shirts we've ever designed for our merch store. Good soldiers follow orders. Inspired by the haunting final scene of the Clone Wars. I love this shirt. It says everything about how the clones and the Republic military were used by the elites to achieve their own selfish ends, and I love its bitterly ironic use of this line.
Good soldiers follow orders.
Shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel. I want to thank you guys for your support. The link for this shirt is below, so let's break this baby down. Episode 10 is called Identity Crisis, and it's where Emery finally takes the spotlight. She's always been in the background of various episodes, but she's always stood out from the rest of the clones. And at the end of last season, we found out why. She is an early female clone of Jango Fett, just like Omega. So I'm kind of starting to see her as an alternate pathway for Omega. If Omega had been raised on Kamino, she could have ended up just like Dr. Emery Carr, a cloner who always follows orders and just strives to please people who are in authority. Remember, Omega was a lot like this with the Bad Batch when she joined. She wanted to learn all their plans, so she studied every tech manual inside and out. And in this episode, we see that Emery Carr is very sheltered. She's only ever known this life working for Hemlock, and she wants to advance and gain more responsibility. But throughout the episode, she learns what the Empire is actually up to, and her own individuality begins to surface. This is sort of like a mini arc for the story of all clones since Attack of the Clones began. When we first were introduced to the clones, we heard,
They are totally obedient, taking any order without question.
And then at the end of the Clone Wars, we see a clone, Rex, defying orders to save Ahsoka's life. And this is the theme of this show, The Bad Batch. It's about soldiers who refuse to follow orders and instead to follow their own conscience. All of this is where the title of this episode, Identity Crisis, gets its name. We start off on this ice world, which has architecture that seems inspired by the American Southwest. We see a few recognizable aliens like this Bith and Arcona, and of course, the antagonist of this opening, the Snitch Aqualish. We also get a new species introduced here. In the credits, we see the mom and baby are called Eilish and Bairn. So I'm going to assume that the mom is named Eilish since Bairn is the Scottish word for baby. It's a great design for the species. They're short, cat-like people with 4 ears, and the cat-like appearance is even more pronounced thanks to these tunic collars that look like pet collars. This is a great way to design a species that we will immediately feel sympathy for, save the cat and all that. And then we see this baby using the Force. And look, Dave Filoni's shown us a baby using the Force before in the Clone Wars episode Children of the Force. I didn't like it then, and I don't really like it now. Yes, babies can be Force sensitive, but more like baby Ahsoka in Tales of the Jedi. It's like an innate ability that they can't really control and do things with yet. So for a baby to command the Force enough to throw an object, that should take years of training. But whatever, in this episode it gets the plot moving. Let me know what you think about characters using the Force too easily down in the comments.
Hey everyone, guess what? I'm a doctor now. Oh yeah, man, that's
right,
great.
dude, that's really cool. Congrats on getting your medical degree.
Oh, doctors need degrees? That explains the screaming.
Oh no, dude, why are you pretending to be a doctor?
Well, I have a wife and baby at home and I need to pay the bills somehow.
Well then, you should learn programming and back-end web development. According to Stack Overflow, the median salary for back-end web developers in the United States in 2023 was over $100,000.
Nah, that won't work. I don't know anything about computers.
And that's okay. You can learn programming from Boot.dev. They're a partner for this video. Boot.dev is essentially a programming RPG where you earn XP, complete quests, and compete in global leaderboards. You see, Boot.dev understands that the best way to learn code is to make sure that you are never bored, so they make learning fun and competitive.
Well, I do love games, and I was a pretty terrible doctor.
The platform gets your hands on the keyboard and gets you writing a ton of code right away. So if you ever wanted to learn coding, this is the best way to start because you learn by doing. And the Boot.dev Discord community is active and there to help you if you ever get stuck. Also, if you're ever completely stuck or just want to see how the instructor wrote the code, there are solutions available for every challenge on the site. So click the link in the description box and use my code to get 25% off your first payment of Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription that you choose.
Yeah, Boot.dev sounds like a great deal, thank you.
Back to what I was saying. So what we're seeing in this scene is how quickly the Empire has been able to change the narrative around the galaxy. Just a few years earlier, a child showing Force sensitivity would have been called a miracle.
Ahsoka is Jedi.
But now there's a stigma attached. The Emperor framed the Jedi for trying to overthrow the government. He made them into war criminals. And now everyone knows that any Jedi or potential Jedi are meant to be reported because they're traitors to the Empire. The Aqualish, who by the way are always up to no good, calls the cops on the baby.
I've got a tip for a Class 1 bounty hunter.
Stupid snitch. I'll cut him. Give me at him.
Easy, Doug, easy. I will say this though, this I think is the first time we hear an Aqualish speaking basic. If I'm wrong about that, let me know down in the comments. And you guys ever feel like certain species in Star Wars are just always the bad guys because we saw them do a bad thing in the original trilogy? It's pretty unfair of all these writers to paint an Aqualish with the same brush just because one of them got into a bar fight on Tatooine. Next we go back to Mount Tantus, where Hemlock is supervising a chamber that looks and sounds a lot like a carbon freezing chamber in The Empire Strikes Back, except this chamber is creating the next gen of Clone X.
Wait, what's Clone X?
Well, Clone X is the name given to the assassin clones that the Empire has created, who seem totally brainwashed and loyal to Dr. Hemlock. Now, I actually have a theory about Clone X I'm going to talk about a little later in the video, but for now, I'll just say that the show is hinting at another huge reveal that we haven't seen yet. And like I said, I think here he's looking at a Gen 2 soldier that's not quite ready yet. Now, we learned that after Omega escaped, Nala Se refused to help the Empire, and in her place, Dr. Carr gets top priority clearance. And then we finally get to see the top secret ray-shielded vault the Emperor visited in Episode 3. Now, in our first Easter egg video of the season, we pointed out that these shields are like the safety protocols that we saw on the Emperor's home planet of Naboo, which gave us the imagery of descending into different rings of hell to face the devil, Darth Maul. But here, these layers of hell reveal the greatest evil of all, child abuse.
Yeah, so what's going on there?
So the Emperor wants to achieve immortality, like he promised Anakin they would do in Revenge of the Sith. And he's worked out that if he can create a Force-sensitive clone body, then he can use Sith dark magic to possess that body with his spirit. But to make a clone body Force-sensitive, it has to retain midi-chlorians, which do not want to live in clone bodies, maybe because they're artificial. But Omega's blood has a kind of bonding agent that will allow the midi-chlorians, or M-count, to stay within a cloned body. Basically, remember this?
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Omega is the somehow, and somehow Palpatine returned, like our Somehow Palpatine Returned t-shirt for sale at our merch store. But also, the Emperor using children is thematically perfect for this saga. The Emperor is essentially an evil wizard from fairy tales, and fairy tales are filled with cautionary stories like Hansel and Gretel to warn children about dark magic that preys on their innocence. Palpatine serves the dark side of the Sith, which draws its power from death. So of course, the dark side would naturally prey on new life. But also, the Emperor has been snatching babies for years. He hired Cad Bane to steal Force-sensitive kids in the Clone Wars, and the Sith Inquisitors did the same in Star Wars Rebels.
Choose 4 children and bring them to Mustafar.
But rather than training them up to be child soldiers like Napoleon's hounds, he just wants to harvest them for parts. And this shows us that the Emperor's plan for immortality has always been a key part of his overall plan. It's probably why he chose a clone army for the Republic instead of simply creating a second droid army or drafting regular men and women into the service of the war. Palpatine always meant to advance the technology of cloning to a point where he could create a clone body for himself. Now, on the way in, we can spot several Imperial clone commandos, an RA-7 protocol droid, and the children in the vault are a Pantoran, an Iktachi, and a Mirilon, the same species as Barasafi.
So wait, is Omega Force sensitive?
Well, I mean, she might be or she might not. All we know for sure is that her DNA can allow a clone to hold midi-chlorians. So I'm going to throw out another wild theory here. Rey's dad was a clone of Palpatine that could not hold midi-chlorians. This clone escaped, met a woman, and then her DNA combined with his allowed Rey, who is part clone, part human, to be Force sensitive. So maybe Omega is Rey's mom. The years line up, but the accents do not.
Be brave. None of us belong in here.
Back on the ice planet, we hear the spurs of the top Class 1 bounty hunter in the galaxy, Cad Bane. Now, Cad Bane, as I've said before, is modeled after Clyde Van Cleef's character in The Good and the Bad and the Ugly. Note the wide-brimmed hat, the duster, and how he always holds his toothpick like a cigar. So he walks with spurs to add to this cowboy aesthetic. It's the same reason Boba Fett made this same sound in The Empire Strikes Back. In fact, a deleted episode of the Clone Wars would have shown Bane mentoring Boba Fett that ends in a duel where we see how Boba Fett's helmet got this dent. So, their duel in the Book of Boba Fett was actually meant to be a rematch. Bane's droid is named Toto360 because Cad Bane is famously a big fan of 80s pop rock.
Here we go.
So we have seen Cad Bane hunt Force-sensitive kids before in the aforementioned Clone Wars episode Children of the Force, the one where the baby uses the Force to move around a ball. In that episode, Palpatine explicitly says why he needs these kids.
I need test subjects.
Which is pretty cool because they made this episode 10 years before they decided Palpatine should try to return as a clone after the Return of the Jedi. Bane shoots the mama with a stun blast, but how terrifying was this scene? Like, we have seen Bane do some pretty evil stuff, but this is like truly terrifying next level evil. He places the baby in a carrier that's a lot like the one Grogu used, another Force-sensitive baby that was hunted down by the Empire. And then afterwards he throws these credits at this dank ferric Aqualish. Hope that he shoots is happy. So back on Mount Tantus, notice the kids are wearing these same prisoner uniforms that Crosshair and the other adult clones wore in previous episodes. Now, I've pointed out before how this is very similar to the inmate uniforms the prisoners with jobs wore in Andor, and how Andor's use of these uniforms seemed modeled after George Lucas's first feature, THX 1138. But in this episode, also notice how the kids are kept below an observation deck, just like how in Andor the prison guards were kept on a level above the prisoners. The map of the facility is even similar to the prison map that we saw in Andor, and in both Andor and the Bad Batch, when the prisoners escape, the facility goes into lockdown suddenly with red lighting. The alarm sound we hear is the original Imperial alarm ever since Return of the Jedi. We see a medical droid take a sample from the Ictachi kid. Now, you might remember that in The Mandalorian, we saw an interrogator droid draw blood from Grogu. That could be because the Empire had to use whatever they had on hand for medical facilities, and that there was a dearth of clone-specific medical gear in the years following the fall of the Empire. The Myralian kid who tries to escape is named Jax, and I'm wondering if he was named after Jaxon, the infamous green rabbit alien from the Star Wars comics. Like, after George Lucas saw that character on the cover of the first original Star Wars story in the comics, he immediately demanded creative control of all of Marvel's Star Wars comic stories. Once again, I gotta praise the score of Kevin Kiner for creating this amazing 70-synth soundtrack.
Set to stun.
Which is very in line with 70s sci-fi thrillers like THX, Zardoz, and Logan's Run. The clone commando in the episode is Commander Scorch, who has appeared in several Bad Batch episodes, but frankly, he's kind of interchangeable with all the other commandos that we see. Now, I have really enjoyed seeing how these elite clone troopers introduced all the way back in Season 3 of the Clone Wars have continued on serving the Empire after the Republic fell. After all, good soldiers follow orders. Dr. Carr goes to see Nala Se, who basically guilt trips her into helping children.
And what about the other children?
I did what I could. Now they will look to you.
We also learned that Emery was also taken away as a child. Now, I assume this means that Palpatine started his cloning project a very long time ago, shortly after Sifo Dyas commissioned the clone army 10 years before Attack of the Clones. If that's the case, then Carr would be a clone who grows with double the acceleration, and she also would have been designed with a specialty, to be a scientist. So in a way, this makes Emery Carr an honorary member of the Bad Batch. And then Dr. Hemlock takes a call from Moff Tarkin, who's upset about his use of resources.
Questions have been raised regarding the financial impact your facility is having upon Imperial resources.
And I just gotta say, all this fits in perfectly with what we know about Tarkin from the expanded lore, like the Thrawn novels and Rogue One. Tarkin was placed in charge of managing Imperial resources. He frequently butted heads with Orson Krennic about the expense of Project Stardust, aka the Death Star, and he even enlisted Admiral Thrawn's help to aid in streamlining the resource management. In Rogue One, we see Tarkin fire Krennic from the project so he could take control of the Emperor's greatest weapon for himself. So Tarkin's very ambitious and often undercuts his fellow officers. And in this scene, he's trying to break Hemlock's veil of secrecy to discover why this project is so important to the Emperor.
It is for a project that is of personal interest to the Emperor.
Which is what?
I'm afraid that's classified.
Now here, Hemlock is looking at a different design from Clone X. I think this upgraded clone is who he was looking at in the first scene. The helmet design kind of looks a little bit like the Cybermen from Doctor Who.
Destroy them at once!
Which also looks like an ODX series protocol droid like Hu Yang. Now, if I had to guess, I think that all of these Clone X troopers are somehow tied to Crosshair. Either he originally led them, or they were mind-wiped using his DNA somehow. There's going to be some kind of connective tissue here. This was even teased a few episodes ago.
You had your chance to be one of us.
Clone X says,
I tracked down the Trandoshan
Trandoshan.
And that Trandoshan is Sid, the Bad Batch's old handler who introduced them to Fee Genoa, Wanda Sykes' pirate character who introduced the squad to the planet Pabu. So Emery goes to meet Cad Bane at the space station orbiting Coruscant. And is it me, or does this look a lot like the Narendra station from The Wrath of Khan? It seems like this was definitely modeled as a tribute to the classic space dock from that movie. She's accompanied by Scorch and a squad of Gen 1 TK troopers, regular human troopers whose masks look more like regular military helmets. And then we get a good look at Bane's classic ship, the Nullifier. And guys, I have to once again reiterate that this is taking the Empire to a whole new level of evil. I always knew Cad Bane was amoral, but kidnapping a baby places him in the Star Wars Villain Hall of Fame. When the lid closes on the baby, it's a reinvention of the classic shot of characters looking into the trunk of a car, combined with the often used distorted wide-angle lens POV of a baby looking out of its crib. Now, combining these two shots really hits home to the Empire. This is not an infant. This is an object, something to be bartered and traded for.
Younger than I expected.
Then he'll be less trouble.
Back at the prison, notice how the wall grate here is a standard Imperial issue. We first saw this design in A New Hope, and earlier in this season it was the fencing surrounding an Imperial compound. Now I love details like this because it makes sense that the Empire would standardize the look and production of everything so they could produce material on a mass scale, exactly like we saw in Andor. Now, in episode 1 this season, we saw Omega taking straw from Batcher's stall to create a straw version of her bunny Lula. Emery took this from her.
We've been over this before, Omega. Personal items are forbidden.
But we also saw her relent and return the toy to Omega, showing that she felt real empathy toward the little girl. After all, they are probably the only two female clones of Jango Fett. Now we see that, following her escape, Carr actually kept the toy. Maybe to remember Omega by, or maybe to give back to her in case she ever returned. The point is, she passes this toy on to Baron. Now this shows how Omega has changed Emery for the better, and now that change has made this baby's life just a little bit better. Now throughout this show, Omega is always able to see the good in people and make everybody's life less formal and more caring. Following the devastation of the Clone Wars, people need someone like this to show them how to embrace the actual joy in life. Which brings us up to episode 11, Point of No Return. This is another aptly named episode because this begins the endgame for this series. The Bad Batch had Pabu as a safe house, and now it's gone. They always had the Marauder as a mobile home, and now that's gone. And now, I seriously doubt if Omega is going to go back to Tantus and then escape again. From here on out, the endgame of this show is going to be the Bad Batch liberating Mount Tantus and destroying Project Necromancer.
Why do you think that?
Because if Project Necromancer was running for 20 years straight, then the Emperor wouldn't have moved it to Exegol like we see in Rise of Skywalker. And if everything went according to plan, it wouldn't have taken 30 years for us to hear this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Now, there's a lot of Arabesh in this episode, so I'm going to break it all down for you right now. This sign reads Depot Manager. All of the Arabesh on Fee's decoded logs are just serial numbers with no planet names, but the first letters of all of them do line out to spell out your mom. This reads Target Tracking. This one reads Cloaking Initiated. And this tells you that this is some real Black Ops tech, because in The Empire Strikes Back, an Imperial officer says that the Millennium Falcon was too small for a cloaking device.
No ship that small has a cloaking device.
So, if Clone X has a cloaking device on a ship this small, that must mean that the Empire kept this technology secret from the rest of the military. And this one reads Translating. The droid in the hangar is named Ollie, and it's voiced by Matt Lanter, the voice of Anakin in the Clone Wars. Fee Genoa lands to refuel, having some banter with her Centrifugal Gonk droid.
I'd repair you like I did that time on Android Prime.
The droid gets in and out of the ship using a vacuum tube system, like how the droids entered the Sandcrawler in A New Hope. And then the FE droid hooks up a fuel line that is modeled after the clamps and hoses used to refuel commercial airliners. Also, I've always liked how Fee just has a steering wheel in her cockpit. It's a really cool detail. Now, I've also pointed out how cool the Clone X ship is. It's sleek and triangular, and even has display consoles that look like inverted triangles. Now, as I pointed out a couple videos ago, this is a very Sith-like design. The Sith take a lot of their imagery from triangles, like the Sith hologram, and pointed spires like Vader's palace. This is because the Sith are structured very much like a pyramid because there can only ever be one master on top. The team is loading up the Marauder to leave as Omega says her goodbyes to the first home she's ever really known. She gives Liana Tech's goggles, which we saw the Batch were hanging on to all the way back in episode 2 this season.
This way. The pace of us is still here.
Now this was a very sweet gesture, a way for Omega to be sentimental about Tech's death while making sure that a piece of him was laid to rest here on Pabu. In fact, I guess I should mention the fan theory that Tech is the mysterious clone Project X and that Hemlock is resurrecting him, but man, I really hope that's not the case. Death has to mean something in this universe. I will admit though that once Dave Filoni invents a character, they're so immortal that they can even find a backdoor into time and space to keep them alive. Now notice how Omega's theme plays here, but in a sad minor key. Next, Clone X flies into the island and hides in the same cave that Ventress used last episode. And, sorry I keep pointing this out every week, Omega's communicator is the same one we first saw in A New Hope, and it makes the same sound that we heard here. Clone X's targeting visor swivels downward like the one on his fellow clone Boba Fett's Mandalorian armor. Crosshair also uses the same gear. Another similarity between him and these Black Ops clone soldiers. Hell, they even kind of talk alike.
You had your chance to be one of us.
You weren't loyal to me.
When he identifies Hunter and Crosshair, it looks like security footage of Hunter from the Season 2 finale, and this is definitely security footage of Crosshair and Mount Tantus. And in Omega's photo, she has short hair. I think this was taken from her original file back on Kamino. When Hunter realizes they've been compromised, he sends away Mox and the other clone boys that we met in Episode 2. Now, Mox is voiced by Daniel Logan, the original Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones. And then, the Marauder was destroyed! This was the most heartbreaking loss of a Star Wars ship since Din Djarin lost the Razor Crest.
I have dreamed a dream, but now that dream is gone from me.
I liked how Wrecker shields Gonky with his own body to protect him from the blast. But really, Gonky should have died here, right?
We're the arms wide open.
It would have been a great way to raise the stakes for the final arc of this show. When the Imperial ship, which looks a lot like a Venator-class Star Destroyer, enters the atmosphere, we hear thunder. Now, in the episode Harbinger, I talked about how the rare cloudy day on Pabu was a harbinger of the coming Imperial storm, and that metaphor is made almost literal when the Star Destroyer arrives on a storm cloud. Now, the image of this calls to mind the Star Destroyer of Jeddah in Rogue One hanging over the city, but also of the Nihil in the High Republic novels, who generate ionic storms to mask their ships in space. The Empire sends out Republic gunships like we first saw at the Battle of Geonosis and Attack of the Clones, and then commando units lead regular TK troopers into the city. And guys, I gotta tell you, this whole sequence was so scary and foreboding. They spent so many episodes setting up Pabu as this idyllic haven that seeing the Empire disrupt that was really jarring. Another thing about this action sequence is that the Bad Batch just flat out lose. We get this great sequence where Hunter stealth attacks troopers and commandeers a shuttle, and then Clone X shoots down his own pilot and Hunter loses. Wrecker gets blown up, he loses. Later on, Crosshair can't even make it to the ship in time to place a tracker, and that's supposed to be the only thing he's good at. He loses. I feel like in most episodes of this show, the Bad Batch are such an elite commando force that they're almost playing the game on easy level. So we needed to see them get pushed up against the wall, so Omega would have no choice. She has to surrender before this flame trooper can burn down these houses. Oh, and by the way, notice how this lamp in Shep Hazard's house looks a lot like a DNA helix. Very cool detail given that he's hiding genetically artificial people. After Omega is captured, she simply meditates using the techniques that Gungi taught her last season and that she used to help Crosshair 2 episodes ago. Now, I like that the show has introduced this question: is Omega actually force sensitive? Ventress said that she wasn't.
No.
But she could have been lying. We now know that Omega's DNA is like a bonding agent for midi-chlorians to clones.
The young clone's blood is the only binder that's proven to be compatible with their DNA to recreate their M-count levels.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that she can use the Force. I think that for Omega to escape, again, from Mount Tantus, she's going to need a new technique that the others can't see coming, that the Empire can't predict. I look for her to join up with the other Cortexiphan kids in prison and use the Force to break out. So, what did you guys think of the episodes? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.